What I'm addressing today is the concept of cyber risk. This is a bunch of stuff that is sort of a preview into my third book, the book I'm writing now. And it's all about risk. And a lot of people imagine that cyber risk and cybersecurity are kind of the same thing. Cyber risk management involves a lot of cybersecurity. It turns out there's more to it than that. And that's what I wanted to focus on today. Some of the options that we have in the OT space, in the industrial space, for managing risk that don't exist in the IT space, that are sort of unique opportunities that we should take advantage of. So start at the beginning. Risk starts with consequences. A report I'm coming out with probably in 2 weeks' time, it'll be pushed out on the ICS Strive website as well as the Waterfall website, is looking at incidents in 2021. There were more than twice as many incidents in 2021 with physical downtime, with physical consequences, as there were in 2020. We're seeing, kind of what we expect, the exponential growth. 5 years ago, we might go a whole year without a cyber incident with physical consequences. Today, we're seeing more than one a month. We're seeing over 100 sites shut down by these incidents, almost all of which are ransomware. It's going to get worse. I mean, if you believe the Gartner group, Gartner predicts that by the end of 2023, we'll see something like a little less than 1/3 of critical infrastructure organizations worldwide suffer downtime because of ransomware. That's huge. I mean, that's way more than the 100 sites that are affected here. Gartner's also predicting that by, I think it was 2025, you can see the footnotes there, cyber attacks are going to be targeting health and safety. They're going to be, basically attempted murder is what's happening in these cyber attacks within a very small number of years. Again, it seems extreme today, but predictions like this have unfortunately been borne out. So it's all about consequences. And I see Sarah in the back there, one of the co-authors of Consequence-Driven Cyber-Informed Engineering. The book from INL, in my mind, the definitive text on industrial risk assessment for the next decade. And one of the steps in the methodology is select your consequence. A lot of us focus way too much on high frequency, low impact events because we have statistics. Viruses get loose on the network and we have to clean them out. What CCE advocates is focus on the other end of the spectrum. Focus on the big fish. Focus on the truly unacceptable consequences, because that's, in a sense, that's the intrinsic difference between IT and industrial. There's a lot of superficial differences. Patching is hard. It's difficult to put antivirus everywhere. But these are all driven, I argue, by consequence. If we had a magic wand and we could magically update every piece of software, every piece of hardware in our industrial suite within a millisecond of vulnerabilities becoming known in that stuff. If we had that magic wand, there would still be a difference between IT security and OT security, and the difference is consequence. When we compromise an IT network, what happens? It's a business consequence. We detect the affected machines. We identify them. We isolate them. We take a forensic snapshot for later analysis. We erase them. We restore from backups. We repeat. Here's the intrinsic difference between IT and OT risk-wise. We cannot restore human lives or damaged equipment from backups. There will always be a difference between IT and OT. Oh, there we go. Oh, what am I doing here? Okay. So, digging deeper with risk, a lot of people, and even standards, I'm thinking NIST 830, the one focused on risk management, defines risk as consequence times likelihood of the event in a given time frame, usually annually. To me, that's the wrong model. That's the right model for hurricanes. It's the right model for earthquakes because they happen at random. We have statistics. Sometimes we have to look into the geological record for earthquakes for statistics. But we have statistics going back, and we can use those statistics to predict what's likely to happen in the future, how likely certain consequences will be. But when we're talking deliberate attack, and even if you read NIST 830 very closely, you'll see that when they, I read it and I said, likelihood? What do you mean likelihood? Because if a cyber attack works, if you break into a target, it's almost certain that exactly the same attack launched against exactly the same target will work a second time. It's not a probabilistic thing, it's a deterministic thing. In safety terms, all cyber vulnerabilities are design flaws. Okay, they're not random equipment failure that would lead to injury or death. They are program flaws in the safety program. So I looked at 830 or 33, whatever it was, and I said, what is this likelihood? Where do they get how do they figure out what is the likelihood? And they say, well, the likelihood is a qualitative measure determined in terms of vulnerability, capability, blah, blah, blah. So really what they're doing, and what I think is the right way to model risk, is to model risk not as a product of consequence and likelihood and then make up some kind of likelihood. It is as a function, not a product, not a multiply. It's a function of consequence, intent, opportunity, and capability. This is the way that we model terrorist attacks, which are also deliberate attacks on a given target. If there is intent, if we have an adversary who wants to come after us, and that adversary's capability exceeds the opportunity needed to attack us, if their capability is greater than, in a sense, our defensive posture, if they can exploit the residual risk opportunities that remain in our defensive posture, we're going down. There's no likelihood about it. And so, what are the tools we have? We have, cybersecurity can reduce opportunity. We can't do much about the enemy's capability. The ransomware groups today are lagging nation-state capabilities by about 3 to 5 years. What we see the nation-states doing to each other today, we should expect ransomware to be doing to all of us within 3 to 5 years. So what we need to do is deal with the opportunity and not just reduce it a little. We need to do something else. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I did want to point out that there is a degree of likelihood in ransomware today, and that degree has to do with intent. 22 sites went down in 2021 because of ransomware, 22 enterprises, like I said, over 100 sites. The tools and techniques used by those ransomware agents were very sophisticated. If they came against most of the sites in the world, they would also go down. The only random bit of ransomware today is target selection, because the ransomware groups have a limited capacity to attack only so many sites at once. And, think about it. If we go down because of a ransomware attack, and we're called before the board to explain what's going on. We've been paying for security. Why did we go down? Well, and we explain, we knew those ransomware groups had really powerful attack techniques, and we knew that if they came against us, we'd go down because, we can't defend against a nation-state attack from even a couple of years ago, and that's the tools they're using. But we didn't think they'd target us. We'd all be fired. That's the wrong answer. Okay, we need to understand the pervasive attack capabilities in the environment, and we need to defend against them reliably rather than count on not being targeted. So how do we do that? I'm going to go through three approaches here. I want to mention Securitypha review. That's the middle text in the diagram. It's a book from Connexus. It's brilliant in my mind. I did not know how to do this when I read the book. I didn't know this was even possible. And after I read the book, I went, well, this is obvious. Everyone should be doing this. It's the best kind of book where you say the result is obvious, but I didn't know it before I read the book. So, I think the author's brilliant. PHA is process hazard analysis. In the safety world, it's a standard assessment that you go through to figure out how much trouble you're in and what kind of mitigations you have in place and whether the mitigations address the risk adequately. SPR adds a step to the methodology and says, when you've done all that safety stuff, because that tends to be your worst case consequences, add a column to the spreadsheet that says, are the mitigations hackable? If you have a very undesirable outcome, and all of your mitigations are software-based, they're hackable, then we're in trouble. Then we need to put, all of the most powerful tools in, 62443 into play to defend these systems. If instead we can look at that and say, what I should do is add a buckle valve to the boiler, so that if the boiler overpressurizes, the brace on the valve breaks, it snaps. The pressure's released, the boiler does not explode and does not kill everybody nearby. That's an unhackable mitigation. That's engineering. Okay, that's not cybersecurity. We're not putting a longer password on the safety system for the boiler. We are making it physically impossible for the boiler to explode. This is what engineers do. The engineering profession exists because they manage physical risk. This is what engineers do. And we as cybersecurity professionals need to recognize this and say, it's better to make small design changes and completely eliminate the consequence. Just take it off the table. We haven't reduced the opportunity. We've wiped out the consequence. It's gone. It's better to do that than spend an enormous amount of effort reducing somewhat the opportunity by increasing the passwords and blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying do one or the other. Don't get me confused. I'm emphasizing the engineering here because that's, in a sense, the underemphasized piece. We need to do it all. Okay, the sites I work with are the most secure sites on the planet, and they do ITsec, they do OTsec, they do engineering, they do it all. But this is, in a sense, the neglected bit that we need to understand, that needs to be documented. CCE, Sarah was handing out books yesterday, getting it signed. I've got mine signed. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. It's a book on risk assessment. Primarily, it's got some good ideas in there about the role of consequence in the selection of the elements that you want to control, what you want to focus your security program on. It's also got a couple of chapters on physical mitigation. Now, look at the title: Consequence-Driven, Cyber-Informed Engineering. Not cyber-informed cybersecurity. They're talking about engineering. So yes, there's a whole bunch in there on risk assessment. That's primarily what the work is. It's a definitive work on risk assessment. But they're saying once you assess the risks, here's ways to manage the risk. Here's a way to eliminate the risks using engineering. CCE points out it's not just safety consequences that can be truly unacceptable. There can be other consequences like, the lights go out for the society for 3 days. This is unacceptable. There's, it could be that there are business consequences that would drive the enterprise completely out of business. That's also an unacceptable outcome. So focus on the big fish, expand your scope so that you're dealing with all of the nasty consequences, not just the safety, but safety is important. And where you can, use engineered, unhackable protection. And SecOT is the third one. This is the book we were giving out at the Waterfall Cabana. It's my latest work. I'm working on the new one. This one is not a book about Waterfall. It's a book about our customers. It's a book about what the world's most secure sites do differently. They ask different questions. They get different answers. And one or two levels deep into the book, one level deep is, one question they ask. In the IT world, we ask the question, how can I protect the information, the confidentiality, the integrity, blah, blah, blah. The sites I work with don't ask that question. They observe that if I have a control system, the only way that control system can change from normal or uncompromised to compromised is if attack information enters the system. All cyber sabotage attacks are information. This is the definition of a cyber sabotage attack. The information might come in on a USB, it might come in on a cell phone, it might come in through a firewall, it might come in my head as I walk past security, a password and malicious intent that comes out through my fingers into the first cyber asset in the target zone that I come across. So the world's most secure sites, they ask the question, how can I protect physical operations from information, more particularly from attacks that may be embedded in information that's coming in? And they answer the question, they say, well, there's only two ways information can move. It can move offline, on a USB stick, on a cell phone, in my head, where I'm physically carrying the medium that has the information in it across security. And the second way is online, through the wires, through the wireless, through the fiber, where nothing's physically moving other than maybe electrons or photons. In terms of protection against offline attacks, again, these sites, where they can, will use physical means. They'll say, this device doesn't need a CD drive, remove it. Put it somewhere else. It's gone. We don't need these USB ports. Literally glue them shut. People laugh, but why leave them there? Why leave this threat vector open if you don't need to? But in a sense, if you look at chapter 4 of the book, the offline protections, in a sense, there's no surprises there. They're kind of what we already know from the IT world, just done quite a bit more intensely, more thoroughly, more systematically than we tend to see in the IT world. Where the surprise comes is in the online. And this is where we observe, not everywhere, but at boundaries, at criticality boundaries, at consequence boundaries, where you have, the consequence of compromising this network is truly unacceptable. It's a physical consequence. The consequence over here of compromising the business network is a business consequence. We lose some money. We lose a bit of reputation. We have to buy some insurance for the customers whose credit card infos we leaked. When you've got that boundary between two networks at two different levels of criticality, that's where you put a unidirectional gateway. This is my business. I talk about unidirectional gateways. But in a sense, it's a mitigation that lives at the boundary between engineering and security. People think of it as a security device because it kind of fits at that layer where you'd otherwise think of a firewall. But really what you're doing is changing the design of the network so that the bad stuff simply can't get in anymore. It's not physically possible to send the bad stuff through the gateway in the wrong direction. That's how the gateways work. A word about how the gateways work, if you're not familiar with it. The hardware at the center is the strange one-way hardware. It can only send information in one way. It's not that it's only allowed to send information in one way. It's only possible to send information. There's a laser in the circuit board on the left. There is a photocell, a fiber optic receiver in the circuit board on the right. There's a short piece of fiber that's almost exactly this long, almost all of the time. And so you can send from one circuit board to the other. But there is no laser in the receiving circuit board. There's no transmitter. It's not a transceiver. It's a receiver. And so it's not physically possible to send any photons back down the wire. So we can get information from operations out to the business where we can profit from the information, and nothing gets back. It's not physically possible. The magic, in a sense, what confuses people, and this is in the NIST definition at 800-82, they define a unidirectional gateway as the one-way hardware that makes copies of servers or emulates devices. How does that work? Let's say there's an OPC server in the industrial network. It's the focus of IT-OT integration. All of the information that's allowed to be shared with the business is in the OPC server. It's a very common design. The Waterfall software, the unidirectional gateway software, logs into the OPC server. Username and password, nothing tricky, nothing reverse engineered. Asks for all the registers, all the tags, and all the values. Gets that snapshot of data and pushes it out through the strange one-way hardware. And on the other side, the software is a standard OPC server. It has all the tags and all the values sitting there in memory, less than a second old. And anybody on the IT network, the enterprise historian, or sometimes the SAP service, sometimes even the SOC wants this data, logs into the data, into the OPC server, pulls the data. All of the data that needs to be shared with the enterprise is already there in the replica servers, be they OPC or PI or iHistorian or whatever you need. Not only does nothing get back through the hardware, nothing needs to get back through the hardware. All the queries are sent to the replica, which answers them. So, doesn't matter if the bad guys have stolen, phished every password for every account on every device on the control network. If you cannot get those passwords into the network, they're useless. It doesn't matter if they have discovered a zero-day in every piece of security software that we're using in the industrial network. If those zero-days exploits, which are information, can't get in, you're good. It doesn't matter if they've found a zero-day in the unidirectional gateway software. Because even if you compromise the CPU that's exposed to the IT network, nothing gets back. This is what the hardware looks like. It's not That was a logical diagram on the previous slide. It's usually a 1U appliance. There's a DIN rail form factor. There's a ridiculous number of connectors. If you need to send TIBCO from one to the other, that's possible. If you need to do active MQ, that's possible. If you need to do, and with these connectors, the main meal is generally the industrial replication. But there's a bunch of stuff here that's like smells IT, syslog, and SNMP. What's going on there? You buy the technology, you deploy the technology to get the industrial data out to the business so that the business can profit from access to the data. And these other connectors, they sort of come along for the ride to keep the infrastructure people happy so that the SOC can still see what's happening in the network, so that the NOC can still see if any of the network equipment fails, and so on. So there's a wide variety of stuff that basically turns this hardware into a plug-and-play replacement. And for the IT/OT firewall, again, I would encourage you to have a look at the book. If you didn't pick one up yesterday, I think we're out, but I've got a URL coming up, waterfall-security.com/sec-ot, where you can request a copy. Waterfall distributes them for free as a public service. Chapter 6, I've talked about replicating servers. That's the first of 20 unidirectional network designs in Chapter 6. There's a lot of stuff about unidirectional that's kind of a little alien to anybody familiar with firewalls. And go look through Chapter 6. It's 20 different designs for how do you do remote support through a unidirectional gateway? How do you do web services that are intensely bidirectional between the client, the web client, and the web server through a unidirectional gateway? There's answers for all these questions that are often a little bit counterintuitive, so I recommend Chapter 6 to you. This is the punchline. In the risk management space, it's called due diligence or due care. We have an obligation to the business, to society, often a legal obligation to our insurer to exhibit due care. And I've said here engineering versus cybersecurity. Really, it should be engineering and cybersecurity, but the emphasis in this presentation is on engineering because to me that's what's underrepresented in people's thinking about cyber risk. What's the decision process that we need to go through? Look at worst case consequences. If we're a toaster factory, okay, and we've got mechanical interlocks on all our machines so that when technicians reach in to fix something, their arms don't get cut off. If safety is off the table as a cyber consequence, if the only consequence is, 10 days downtime for the toaster factory and a $1 million hit or a $12 million hit on our earnings, that may be an acceptable business risk. ITsec might be a clear candidate for using on the OT network because there's no consequence boundary. There's no criticality boundary. It's the same risk on either side, the same consequence on either side. Does that mean we should use ITsec in the OT space? Well, there's a second question we have to ask, and that is, if it's going to be a $12 million hit, even if for our size of business that's acceptable, what does it cost to reduce that to $2 million? And if there's engineering mitigations that cost almost nothing, and these engineering mitigations tend to be on the low cost side, well then again, we have an obligation to the business, even if the consequence is acceptable, to reduce that risk by taking a lot of it off the table with some engineering mitigations, with some SecOT, with some gateways, with whatever. If the consequence is unacceptable, then we need to do something. Sit down with the engineers. Can we take some of this consequence completely off the table by making minor changes, routine changes that engineers make all the time to their systems? Can we do that for these systems? Can we make minor changes to the network design to take risk entirely off the table with SecOT or other mechanisms? This is the nature of cyber risk management. These are the tools that are available to us on the OT world that we don't have in the IT world. That's what I had. Are there questions? Argument? I'm grateful nobody distributed tomatoes to you guys. No. Oh, sorry. I did have one more slide. Oh, okay. The obligatory about Waterfall. Waterfall has been around for going on 15 years. Installed worldwide, trusted by critical infrastructures all over the world. We invented the industrial application of the unidirectional technology, the unidirectional gateway. I wanted to leave this up for you. The URL to grab a copy of the book or request one. We try to send worldwide. We can send pretty reliably to the US, but in the pandemic, it's been really hard getting to some parts of the world, but we will try. I would encourage you, if you're not already listening, to tune into the Industrial Security Podcast. It is a podcast about security. It's not a podcast about Waterfall. We have a different expert guest every episode, and it's all about the guest and their perspective on security. Go to your favorite podcast app, search for Industrial Security, you'll find it. And if you're interested, on the Waterfall channel, we also have a channel of videos. We pitch them, we produce them as educational. They're less focused on cybersecurity generally, that's the podcast. They're more focused on the Securitypha methodology that we observe the world's most secure sites using, and how they use that methodology, how do they apply that to the security problem. That's what I had for you, if there's no questions.
So I have a question.
Very good.
Well, you said in Chapter 6 there are best practices on remote orchestration of services through the unidirectional gateway. Can you answer some of those best practices? Because how would that not become an attack path?
Sure. So let me give you the question is, can I give you one of the examples of the surprises in Chapter 6?
Thank you.
Let's look at remote screen view. We have a problem on one of our machines. We see an error message that we don't get. We have a contract, a support contract with Microsoft. So we call up Microsoft and we say, we've got this weird error message out of Windows, what's going on? And they say, connect to our website, we'll take control of your box, we'll figure it out, we'll fix it for you. And we go on my 4 gigawatt power plant, over my dead body, literally. That's not gonna happen. But what we can do is go to our engineering workstation, remote into the machine that's having the problem. So now we see the error message on our engineering workstation, turn on remote desk view, remote screen view, start taking what amounts to a video, push it out through the one-way hardware, and now Microsoft can log into our web server, they can see what's going on, they can see the mouse moving, they can say, okay, bring up system diagnostics, and they see it moving, because they're on the phone. No, that's communications diagnostics, further down. It's a method that's used for expert remote support by untrusted third parties. This voice that I get on the phone has not been through my security screening, so for outsiders, we have a different solution. For insiders, we have different solutions for continuous remote access. Those are some of the examples in Chapter 6.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.